This video was originally going to be titled, What if Uncharted would just commit to the bit? Since Uncharted is more my thing, Indiana Jones is more my dad's thing. But after literal zombies, magic tree sap, and psychedelic water, Uncharted 4 pulled a fast one on all of us and made the story about a crazy pirate and his pile of gold. Just a normal pile of gold. That's it. That was the treasure. Which, you know, fair enough. And it's good. It paid off. Uncharted 4 is one of the best games in the series, competing with 2, depending on how nostalgic you are for that. But Indiana Jones has been going strong in this department. Indy has witnessed the Ark of the Covenant melt people, literal blood magic, undeniable proof for the existence of God, and aliens. So I think it makes my pitch a bit more understandable, a bit better to go with Indiana Jones over Uncharted. And my pitch is that Indiana Jones and other adventure fiction that constantly tease us by flirting with the supernatural occasionally should just commit to the bit and be an urban fantasy. It's fine. People like that. I hope, because I wrote an entire novel about that premise that came out 2 days ago. Yes, this is a barely disguised ad for my novel, Iskandar's Game and the Shadow of Macedon. My second one, where instead of trying to tie it into a niche historical topic to attract viewers, I'm just gonna lore dump about my 60-page world-building document because, well, it's gotta go somewhere. If you thought the Medieval America project was a clusterfuck, oh boy, you're in for a fucking treat. I'm going to go through just the basic building blocks of the world for this project, and I'm going to run through a bit of the setup for the first novel, which you should buy. Okay, I promise I'm not going to shill too hard here. Buy my book! If you don't want to buy the book, but you like what you see here, I wouldn't mind a quick subscribe. Thank you very much. You can find out about, well, the book is already out, but any kind of updates with like audiobook versions, hardcovers, etc. You can sign up to my emailing list to get notified about that. And if you're not sold on the book, there are two chapters available for free on my website that you can read through. Right now, you can buy Iskandar's Game and the Shadow of Macedon in both ebook and paperback versions on Amazon or wherever Ingram Spark distributes.
Wizard Money Gang. We love casting spells.
Iskandar's Game, The Shadow of Macedon, takes place in the year of our Lord, 2022. Yes, Joe Biden is canon.
Are we moving?
Joe Biden, wake up. Joe Biden, wake up.
But history up until that point hasn't gone quite the way we remember. Although I don't know if I would call this an alternate history novel. For all intents and purposes, the broad strokes of history have gone down pretty much exactly as we know them. The discrepancy is that instead of it being because of, like, normal people, there's magic involved. My job, effectively, as an author of this series, is to go look for conveniently, vaguely recorded or unrecorded periods of time in people's lives, such that I can invent an occult conspiracy theory to, like, scrunch in there to fit my narrative. For example, you know Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, German Shakespeare? He went on a trip to Italy early in his life for a few years and met up with this guy named Alessandro Cagliostro, who is a self-professed mystic and magician. Had some ties with the Freemasons, but had his own, like, weird version of it, so I don't know how much the Freemasons actually like him, but he's got some weird shit going on, right? And when Goethe comes back from that, he's relatively interested in the occult. I wonder who started him on that. There's a period of his time in Italy that goes more or less unrecorded. Most people think he was in Venice, which is probably what happened. But what did he do there? This is where I get to start making shit up.
Nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Now, of course, these can't just be regular conspiracy theories with lizard people or chemicals in the water. No. All of these need to lead back to magicians and magic, because it's an urban fantasy. Now, when I say magic, I'm obviously not talking about rabbit out of a hat type sleight of hand stuff, nor even most fantasy tropes with magic. It's not a science, it's not a bloodline, it's not fate. Magic is culture in this world, literally. Let's say you're some guy and you decide to start getting into history. You get more and more into it, especially the history of your home country. You begin to understand the psychology of your culture based on what it's been through and how it got here, and then poof, you're a magician. You might be thinking, wait, what, that's it? Well, what you've just done is used your understanding of your own culture to break through something called Solomon's Wisdom, which is a super ancient, world-spanning spell that causes people to deny the existence of magic, first put into place by the big man of magic himself, King Solomon. After someone decided to go and give a bunch of psychopaths and murderers, the Assyrians, the power to conquer the world. You can break through Solomon's Wisdom with a number of things: history, religion, linguistics, art, music, philosophy, even economics. So long as it helps you understand the reality of your culture's character and psychology. And depending on which cultures you understand enough to draw magic from, you might gain access to new abilities. For example, the Chinese can augment their bodies to superhuman levels with arcane martial arts. The Greeks can use religious icons as methods of containing and releasing energy. The Egyptians can take a midnight stroll through the gates of the Duat and become effectively immortal. The Germans can deconstruct the very essence of any magic thrown at them and pull it apart before it even gets cast. All of these examples are just one of many things that each of these cultures around the world is capable of. Each culture usually has around 7 to 10 different systems they can use, correlating with the different ways culture is expressed. This is stuff like martial arts, as I said before, but also song, writing, astrology, stuff like that. And the world of Iskandar's game is basically overrun with these people. But as a layperson, you'd never know it. While Solomon's Wisdom is powerful at hiding magic from the world, it's not omnipotent. If someone sees you perform an act of magic right in front of their eyes, the odds of Solomon's Wisdom working on that are kind of slim, because it's right there. If it's like obviously impossible. One way that magicians actually hide themselves from regular people is they like turn a little bit of their clothes into a different material through magical methods, and that applies Solomon's Wisdom to your entire body. That is something small enough to where Solomon's Wisdom can just go, okay, bet, erase. But something like, I don't know, if you chuck a fireball at somebody, the odds of someone seeing you pull out a flamethrower you didn't have before, like a fucking cartoon character, it's a little slimmer. What happens instead is the person's mind breaks and they become able to perceive magic without being able to actually perform magic, because they don't actually understand any cultures well enough to do so. And those loose ends can cause other people to break Solomon's Wisdom in the same way. So the magicians of the world have organized themselves into several secret societies that form the foundations for magician society as a whole, called magician circles. They're a bit like governments, mafias, universities, cults, and fraternities all rolled up into one. While a lot of circles operate closely with national governments, such as the Heaven and Earth Society in China, not all of them are bound by national borders. The Palatine Order of Cologne is not made up just of German magicians, but also Austrians, Liechtensteiners, Luxembourgers, and Swiss as well, since they share a cultural group. Sometimes the circles are political alliances. After the French Revolution and the start of German unification, the Lumieres, the French circle at the time, decided to merge with the Spanish and Italian circles to form a bloc against Germany called the Coven of Latium, which still operates today. Some circles are born out of multiple smaller cultures uniting due to proximity to a common enemy or general mutual isolation, such as the Order of the Dragon, which includes both Romanian Solomonari and Hungarian Taltos. It was created by the Emperor Sigismund in order to counter the Ottomans and used to contain Albanians, Serbs, and Croats before the South Slavs split off to form their own circle. Sometimes circles of a common culture split up when they get too far from one another and their magic starts changing. For example, the Abadan Tariqa, the Sufi mystic magician circle that expanded alongside the Islamic Caliphate, balkanized during the Seljuk invasion. They split into the Society of the Setting Sun in North Africa, the resurgent House of Aset in Egypt and Libya, and the final survivors of Uruk claimed dominance over Mesopotamia with the help of Dastur Atash, the Iranian Order of Fire. Meanwhile, the Levantine and Arabic magicians started calling themselves the Sahaba, or Companions of the Prophet, before changing their name to the Grand Lodge of Hejaz, or Hejazi Takya. And these magician circles are dedicated primarily to the development of their culture's magical power and keeping magic a secret from the world. However, the magician circles tend to compete with one another, and sometimes they even wage wars against each other. They give in to grudges and politics like any other organization made out of humans. To try and avoid this spilling over into the wider world, all of them are subject to the authority of the Chaldean court, which is kind of like a magical UN, except they're way more overtly power hungry. So they're just a more honest version of the United Nations. The Chaldean court first assembled in Rome as a sort of senate for all the magicians of the empire, named after the Chaldeans, who were 5 Iron Age magicians who were considered the founders of the oldest magician circles. But since then, it has grown into a more global organization. And the Chaldean court enforces a set of common rules that all magician circles abide by. First, to the best of their ability, no magician should cause Solomon's wisdom to break by performing magic. Once you break Solomon's wisdom, even via mind break, you can always see magic. That's like having a giant loose end running around God knows where, creating more loose ends. So the Chaldean court doesn't want to have to Men in Black everyone who happens to be in the proximity of a fight. Second, any magician circle that decides to kick out one of its own members, or if a magician decides to leave their circle, they are given the status of defector, which means they by default belong to the Chaldean court. This way, all magicians are still accountable to the court, even if they're outcasts. Third rule, the bounty system. Any magician at any time can put a bounty on the head of any other magician so long as they can pay that bounty up front. The only magicians you can't put bounties on are Chaldean courtiers, representatives of each circle to the Chaldean court, and counselors, who are super shady, mysterious magicians who run the court, and even if you did want to kill one of them, you probably couldn't find them. Fourth rule, the Chaldean court can at any time, in retaliations for crimes against or in response to support from a large number of circles, brand someone with damnatio memoriae, which in the magician world is a decree for a magician's punishment by re-blinding them to Solomon's wisdom and effectively removing them from magician society. We got a little Hans Hermann Hoppe action going up in here. Fifth and final rule, the Chaldean court can, if it feels existentially threatened, can brand someone with a Shamsharic decree. A Shamsharic decree is a call to all magicians to persecute a particular individual and acts as a universal death warrant. All of that individual's relatives, friends, allies, and acquaintances who haven't been deemed as trustworthy by the court are blinded to Solomon's wisdom. While a circle can generally get away with helping someone branded under damnatio memoriae, a circle's leadership will be slaughtered if it's caught helping someone who's under Shamsharic decree.
And the Wizard King wishes to punish the accused personally. Don't think I understand.
Individuals under decree will have every member of their family to 2 removals hunted and killed. Except the trainees, all members of their original circle, unless a new oath of fealty is given to the Chaldean court with the blood of their leader, will be forced to defect. Shamsharic decree is a call to all magicians to obey the court to kill an individual. These individuals have to have either created a great calamity to the magical world or be a direct threat to the Chaldean court's existence. The Shamsharic decree has only ever been called 3 times in the Chaldean court's history since its creation during the Roman Empire. Once for Odoacer, once for Attila the Hun, and once for the Seljuk emperor Berkyaruk, which was the cause of the magician involvement in the Crusades.
Itam Zumra Rashupti Ilatim. Itait Belet Ishi Avit Idi.
Obviously, the status quo of the magician world has been informed by a lot of historical context and is rather new. And while I refuse to go through all the history that leads up to the status quo of 2022, I will go over the broad strokes of magician history. But keep in mind that not even most magicians know about this stuff, because about 90% of all magician history has been lost to time. Now, the first magician ever, hands down, was Enheduanna, the daughter of Sargon the Great and the high priestess of Sin, the moon god. Now, during the Akkadian Empire, gods and humans interacted with each other on a much more regular basis than they do now. Humans were not unfamiliar with magic, but their concept of magic was as power from the gods, something that priests only had due to their close relationships with the gods. Where Enheduanna differed is that she was able to use rhetoric to alter reality. The moon god would never have wanted Sargon to ascend to divinity, but Enheduanna managed to convince enough people that her father was a god that it allowed him to actually become a god. And this was the first act ever of human magic. Obviously, this was a big deal for all the gods who had always been gods. It was a violation of the sanctity of their status, and a huge threat if humans could use this to suddenly start making themselves into gods just as powerful as them. By the way, these are also the gods who are asking people for human sacrifices, sacred prostitution, and threaten to wipe cities off the face of the earth if they aren't kept in a life of luxury. So, they're more demons that you make deals with or natural disasters in personified form than they are our modern idea of what a god is. Fearing what humans would be capable of with their magic, the gods began a concerted effort to hunt down any and all practitioners in the burgeoning field of magic. Only the priests who practice it survive, since most gods were in competition with one another, and many of them would falsely accuse the priests of their enemies in a somewhat vain attempt to weaken their cult. This purge was put to an end when one of the most powerful gods in Mesopotamia, Tiamat, looked around at all the petty squabbling between the gods while the humans were growing more powerful by the day, and said, fuck it. She flooded the world using the Black Sea, initiating something we know today as the 4.2 kiloyear event. However, many of the younger gods at the time were more amenable to humanity, and they figured they should try and save some. Granted, by more amenable, I don't mean like they liked us, okay? They just wanted to keep getting their goodies from us and were willing to give humans some concessions in order to keep that gravy train going. 3 kings were each given advance warning of the flood, these being Ziusudra, Atrahasis, and Utnapishtim. But there was one other person, told in advance, who wasn't supposed to be told. You might know him as Noah, the guy with the boat. This is not the first time nor the last time Yahweh breaks the rules of the ancient gods to give a helping hand to humanity, but that's an entire stretch of lore for this world that I don't really want to go into right now and haven't really developed fully. The gods who saved humanity then went on to assassinate Tiamat's consort, Abzu, basically stopping the flooding by making her depressed. After the flood, magic began to proliferate itself all across the world, but it didn't develop all that much as it was spreading. Magic was still pretty much restricted to only priests, and they'd grown a bit lazy and decadent as humans are prone to, forcing the societies of the Bronze Age to revolve around their magic. You want to get married? You gotta see a priest for magic. You want to have a kid? Gotta see a priest for magic. You want to have a good harvest? Gotta see a priest for magic. While some attempted to innovate new cultural technology like Hammurabi, others like Abraham split off from the civilized world to create their own societies. Akhenaten, in a megalomaniacal haze, was spurred on by Set, disguised as a sun god, to replace the priesthood with a materialistic religion that would strip the humans of all their power. This forced the Egyptian priesthood, at the very least, to get off their asses and assassinate him. After his death, Nefertiti, his wife, made some concessions to the magicians by establishing the House of Aset, the world's first magician circle. Over the course of the 1,000 years after the flood, one trend held itself to be true. The gods were losing power to the magicians. And starting with Akhenaten, the gods' attempts to meddle in human affairs were only making things worse for them, as they attempted to subjugate the populations of the Bronze Age world. The Fertile Crescent de-urbanized, and the system by which the gods had been living off of starts to become unbearable. While the gods of nature are desperately trying to hold the system together, the gods of human virtues and civilization begin to compromise with humanity, creating the impetus for covenants, philosophy, and ethics instead of using fear to control their followers. In 1207 BC, a mediation called the Anunnaki Convention was held in the heavens, presided over by An, the king of the Mesopotamian gods. This convention was supposed to help the compromising gods and the gods of nature mediate their differences and find a new way to work with humanity. But, still bitter about the death of Abzu, Tiamat destroys any hope of agreement by assassinating An, thus marks the start of the War in Heaven, which coincides with the Bronze Age collapse. The War in Heaven is a very long, very complicated story that I'll probably never get into because most magicians don't even know it happened, but suffice to say that the Bronze Age collapse and everything that happened there is just a earthly version of what was happening between the gods. The younger gods triumphed over the older gods, destroying the old system. In the Dark Age after the war, gods and humans began innovating cultural technology together, such as objectivity, philosophy, currency, and social contracts. But the old gods weren't out of the game yet. They quickly set to repairing one of the few old societies that survived the war, that being Assyria. They made one last attempt to conquer the world for themselves, using the Assyrian Empire as a proxy. And while they saw a lot of early success, the Assyrians were simply too brutal and straight up too evil for people to put up with them. In response, 5 of the foremost gods of the rebels against the old system sent their most powerful magicians to fight the Assyrians. These are the Chaldeans. Yahweh sent King Solomon, Apollo sent Hecate, Ahura Mazda sent Zarathustra, the Jade Emperor sent Lao Tzu, and Enki sent Nebuchadnezzar. These 5 magicians, the Chaldeans, managed to bring the Assyrian Empire crashing down and cemented the defeat of the old gods, who had their names stripped away from them and were forgotten by history. Their names were then given to new gods who were more willing to work with humanity. So the Ishtar or Inanna of the Sumerian era is not the same as the Ishtar or Inanna of post-Bronze Age collapsed Mesopotamia. But again, more amenable does not necessarily mean they were like, ooh, yeah, let's make a social contract. They were still kind of, they sucked. Solomon would go on to establish the spell known as Solomon's Wisdom in an attempt to keep the power of magic restricted to the exceptionally wise. As time has gone on, the spell's gotten stronger and stronger as mysticism becomes a less accepted part of spirituality. Hecate, Zarathustra, and Lao Tzu would go on to found the first magician circles for the Greeks, Iranians, and Chinese. The Hecatean Circle and the Order of Fire are still around today, but Lao Tzu's circle got absorbed into the Heaven and Earth Society around the 1800s. Nebuchadnezzar, unlike the other Chaldeans, went insane. He backstabbed his old ally Solomon by conquering Israel and beginning the Babylonian exile, which resulted in the creation of the first Hebrew magician circle. Eventually, Nebuchadnezzar would be imprisoned by his own priests and forced to abdicate to his least favorite son, who formed around him as the magician circle now known as the final survivors of Uruk. The classical period from about 550 to 330 BC was a golden age for cultural and magical development, as magicians from all over the world began to hone their craft, strengthen their societies, and seek understanding about the truth of the universe. The only hiccup was the fallout between the Hecatean Circle and the Order of Fire that resulted in the Greco-Persian Wars, but aside from that, pretty good time to be a magician. When Alexander the Great came onto the scene, everything seemed well, at least for the West. China was burning down because of the Warring States period, but they did some innovation as well. But Alexander, during his conquest, discovered that the nameless old gods were not as dead as everyone would have liked them to be. He attempted to contain them by building the Caspian Gates in what is now Georgia as a prison for them, but knows that they won't be held forever. So he conquers the known world in search of a way to kill them. In the end, he failed and left the task of preparing for their return to his generals. But they become more interested in fighting each other So the task dies with them, and people kind of forget that this thing is even an issue. While the rise and hegemony of Rome is considered a golden age for magicians, it was actually a rather stagnating era. There weren't many magical innovations, but it was generally a good time to live as an individual magician. This is also when the Chaldean court established itself. But as the Romans and classical civilization in general became more stagnant, Jesus shows up. I won't go into all the details since I have yet to fully understand and apply the impacts of Christianity to this particular world-building project, but suffice to say that a huge cultural change is set into motion that results in the destruction of both the Roman and Han empires. During the collapse of Rome in late antiquities, magic started developing like crazy, as Germans, Slavs, Norse, Arabs, Turks, and Huns started thinking of magic the way Romans did, introducing their own cultures into the mix. In spite of magician historians referring to this period up until 1259 AD as the Age of Chaos, it's probably the single most productive span of time for magicians in their goal of understanding reality, rivaled only by the Axial Age. But development slows down upon the outbreak of the Protestant Reformation. The conflation with science and mysticism that had been a huge benefit to magicians was starting to separate as the Renaissance and the early modern period set in and said, no, this is secular arithmetic and science, and this is all hooey. The Enlightenment was the death knell for the magician circles. As the Empiricists, a coalition of magicians under the leadership of the Confessors of Westminster, and the Rationalists, a coalition under the Lumieres, the brainchild of King Louis XIV, leads to the most devastating conflict in magician history, the Enlightenment War. The Enlightenment War lasted 72 years, from 1760 to 1832. The 7 Years' War, American Revolution, French Revolution, and Napoleonic Wars were all symptoms of the Enlightenment War, which ended up killing off about 90% of all magicians. Circles that had boasted thousands of members were reduced to less than 100. Many circles went into the 19th and 20th centuries with less than 10 members. A slight resurgence in interest of the occult helped boost numbers, but very slightly, and mostly in the 19th century. But many of the modern occultists ended up splitting away from the established circles anyway. Also lost in the Enlightenment War were the records of most of magician history, although the broad strokes are still known. Despondent and weak after the Enlightenment War, the magician circles took a back seat to world affairs during the Victorian era and the 1900s to focus on consolidation. But in 2008, after the financial collapse, the first uptick in magician population since 1517 was recorded. And since then, magician populations have been exploding. The reason as to why isn't known yet, but as of 2022, most magician circles are back up to having a few hundred members, though the vast majority are under the age of 30 and not quite as masterful as their elders. These new magicians are far more specialized in specific kinds of magic than those that came before. And while many see this spike as a sign of hope, many others fear that this population growth might be a reaction to a far darker motivator that they can't see yet. In 2022, the tensions between the magician circles are at an all-time high. With the influx of new blood, magicians are eager to outcompete their rivals and settle some old grudges. Casus bellis are a dime a dozen, with each and every artifact or historical site in the world having no less than 5 claimants. The Coven of Latium had a communique intercepted by the Japanese, detailing a journal that belonged to the Roman governor of Mauritania during the reign of Emperor Caracalla, detailing the whereabouts of a coin that was found in the tomb of Alexander the Great before it sank beneath Alexandria. Other pieces of evidence have surfaced since then to suggest that this coin, and others like it, might be a key to uncovering the lost tomb and all the treasures that lie within. Treasures being both gold and ancient magic that's been lost to history. Of course, something as monumental as the Tomb of Alexander has several people going after it. The Latins, the Greeks, and Egyptians claim it as an heirloom, and the Chinese want in, having acquired the information during a raid on the Japanese. But they're all in danger of losing it to a singular outcast defector. And for those who find it, there's a hell of a lot more waiting for them than treasure. A lot more than anyone bargained for. And that's it. That's my pitch for my novel. You should go buy it. I have a lot more world building stuff relating to this that I can do. I can do faction videos, kind of like I've done with the Medieval America project. If you guys would like to see that, please let me know. Otherwise, this is probably going to be a one-off sort of thing to kind of get people, you know, a little interested in what the book has to offer. But if the numbers demand it, I can make many of these. Each Magician Circle probably deserves its own video. And I can go into more world building and lore as I build it, and, you know, get there before, should my book ever catch on, I can get there before all the lore YouTubers. So, yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Don't forget, you know, algorithm buttons if you don't want to buy the book. Otherwise, best way to support me is to buy the book. And if you read all the way through it, please leave an honest review. I actually want to see, like, did I do well with this? I can't say for sure. But yeah, after this, I think we're going to do more Interregnum. That video did okay, so we're going to do more Interregnum, or unless I get captivated by some other video idea. Yeah. Bye!